What does it actually take to become one of Apocalypse's horsemen? Not loyalty, not ambition, and definitely not talent. It takes a bad week. Every Horseman of Apocalypse ranked in this video was recruited at the lowest point of their life, which is how a paralyzed Vietnam veteran ended up riding a teleporting robot horse over Manhattan. We are counting down roughly 25 of them, from the ones Apocalypse should have left alone to the single horseman who reshaped the X-Men permanently. 11. Autumn Rolfson, Famine. Apocalypse's third recruit was a teenage girl he found at the lowest point of her life. Autumn Rolfson was already struggling with anorexia when Insaba Nur turned up, offered her power, and dosed her with drugs that clouded her judgment. She came away convinced he was the only person who had ever loved her. As Famine, she could wither crops and living flesh alike, which sounds terrifying until you watch her actually operate. She spent most of her tenure fighting her own teammates. She and War traded insults about each other's bodies until it turned physical, and Apocalypse encouraged the whole thing, because cruelty was always the point. Her powers were nasty enough on paper. Her career was a tragedy wearing a supervillain costume. The saddest part is that she was not even the most exploited person Apocalypse pulled out of a hospital that year. 10. Abraham Kieros, War. Abraham Lincoln. Kieros, and yes, that was his actual name, was a Vietnam veteran paralyzed from the neck down and kept alive by an iron lung. His mutant power was the ability to create explosions by clapping his hands, which is a spectacularly cruel joke to play on a man who cannot move his arms. Apocalypse arrived, built him celestial armor that gave him his body back, and War was born. He was the most militarily competent of the original four by a mile. He took command whenever death was absent. He resented losing that command, and he leveled buildings across Manhattan from the back of a teleporting robot horse. Then Apocalypse discarded him, and Kieros went straight back to the hospital bed and the machine. What redeems him is the ending. Warren Worthington, the man who stole his leadership, eventually tracked him down and healed him. The animated series has been rather less generous since X-Force killed him off early in the current season of X-Men 97. 9. Plague, first Pestilence. Plague was the first modern Horseman Apocalypse recruited, and he found her in the ruins of the Mutant Massacre, an elderly Morlock woman surrounded by the corpses of her own community. Nearly 40 years later, she remains the most quietly effective of that original quartet. Her power let her generate lethal diseases inside her own body and pass them along with a touch, and she used it on Hank McCoy. The infection did not kill him, it slowly stripped away his intellect instead, reducing one of Marvel's greatest minds to something closer to a friendly blue animal. And that plot ran for months while his oldest friends watched it happen and could do nothing. That is genuine, lasting damage, which is more than most Horsemen manage. Unfortunately, she is also remembered for how she exited. During the Horsemen's final ride against X-Factor, Plague fell off her flying horse and died. No last stand, no monologue, just gravity. Both the original cartoon and X-Men 97 kept her in the lineup, which is more staying power than most of her successors ever managed. Apocalypse clearly learned something from that roster, because his next big idea took him nearly 2,000 years to prepare. 8. The Final Horseman. Roughly 15 years ago, Rick Remender and Jerome Opeña revealed that Apocalypse had been running a contingency plan since the 3rd century. Working with his scribe Ozymandias, he spent centuries collecting extraordinary mutants, freezing them in storage, and saving them for the day everything else failed. These were the Final Horsemen: Decimus Furius of Rome as War, Ichizumi of Japan as Pestilence, Jeb Lee of America as Famine, and Sanjar Javid of Persia as Death. On paper, that is the strongest Horseman concept anybody has ever written. Jeb Lee is the standout. A Confederate-era farmer who secretly fought for the Union, he watched his family burn when his neighbors discovered his uniform, and the horror of it triggered a power that turned sound into a flesh-consuming cancer. He drummed at Gettysburg, and men dissolved where they stood. The execution is where it collapses. Apocalypse never summoned them at all. Clan Akaba woke them up, and they ended up serving Archangel instead. Wolverine cut Famine's hands off. Deathlock calmly pointed out that machines cannot catch diseases, and then removed Death's head. Famine was fitted with prosthetic hands and then slaughtered by those same twins. Ichizumi's real legacy turned out to be motherhood, since she and Archangel produced the Apocalypse twins, and X-Men 97 has given the group a far better showing this season in the year 3960. Sometimes the problem is not the roster. Sometimes Apocalypse recruits one person and cannot be bothered filling the other 3 seats. 7. Hulk as War. Nearly 30 years ago, Apocalypse looked at the Incredible Hulk and decided a full set was unnecessary. Across 3 issues, Sabah Nur talked Bruce Banner into becoming War, and the pitch was far cleverer than his usual routine. He did not offer strength because Hulk already had strength. He showed Banner visions of himself as a young man helping raise the pyramids, one enormously powerful outsider quietly explaining to another that he understood being feared by the very people he could have saved. Banner had already woken up restrained in an X-Men holding cell, ignored every attempt to talk him down, battered his way out, and wandered into Egypt in a rage. Then Apocalypse welded celestial armor directly onto Hulk's skin, handed him an energized sword and a gauntlet with a tendril, and released him on Cairo. What follows is the most destructive Horseman tour in the character's history. War picked up an entire pyramid and dropped it on a moving truck. The absorbing man grabbed the sword and was overloaded so badly that he exploded. Juggernaut charged him, got stopped dead, and had his helmet cut open for the trouble. Rick Jones nearly dying is what broke the conditioning at last. The catch is that Apocalypse never filled the other 3 slots, so the single strongest Horseman he ever fielded rode entirely alone. 6. Colossus and Deadpool. About 10 years ago, mutant births had stopped altogether. The Terrigen cloud circling Earth was killing mutants with mpox and sterilizing the rest, so when 600 fresh mutant signatures lit up in Tokyo, it looked like salvation. It was Sugar Man growing embryos artificially, and Jeff Lemire and Humberto Ramos sent Colossus and a handful of teenage students chasing them into the far future. When the rescue team caught up, 12 months had passed on the other side, and Pyotr Rasputin was working for the enemy. Colossus as War is a strong idea. His fellow horsemen were Deadpool, Venom, and a female Moon Knight. Read that list again. Apocalypse, a mutant supremacist whose entire philosophy rests on mutant superiority, filled 3 of his 4 slots with a mercenary, an alien symbiote, and a fist of Khonshu. It is the funniest roster in his history, and nobody involved appeared to notice. Jokes aside, the story underneath is bleak. The Apocalypse they find in Omega World is 1,000 years old and burning the last of himself to stop a dying planet collapsing. And he has already destroyed the embryos because he believes mutant kind is finished anyway. Nightcrawler stabs him for it. Moon Knight goes into a spike pit. Magic has to knock Colossus unconscious to get everybody home, and Pyotr stays a horseman until Nightcrawler tricks Apocalypse into reversing it. 5. Gambit, Willing Death. About 20 years ago, Peter Milligan and Salvador Larroca dropped Apocalypse into a world with 198 mutants left in it, and Remy LeBeau walked up and volunteered. That is what separates Gambit from nearly everybody else here. He was not abducted, tricked, or dying. House of M had gutted his species, Mystique was working to prize him away from Rogue, and Gambit concluded that a monster with a plan beat heroes without one. He agreed to the transformation on a single condition, that his mind stay his own, which meant feeling every second of the process. His touch became a death charge, capable of disintegrating living matter, and he learned to turn breathable air into poison. The rest of that roster was assembled purely by exploiting loss. Gazer, depowered, had to fight an archaeologist for the title of War. Sunfire had lost his legs to Lady Deathstrike, so Apocalypse restored them and named him Famine. Polaris, another M-Day casualty, had her magnetism handed back with a plague factory attached and became Pestilence. All of them drank Apocalypse's blood to seal it, hence the storyline's title. None of them lasted either. Emma Frost pulled Sunfire loose, Iceman knocked Polaris cold before Havoc carried her home, and Gazer died defending his master, stabbed in the back by Ozymandias for his loyalty. Gambit's double-agent plan fell apart almost immediately. 2 decades on, that storyline is getting the adaptation it always deserved in X-Men 97, and Rogue is going to feel every moment. 4. Apocalypse Twins Horsemen. Just over a decade ago, Apocalypse's own grandchildren improved on his methods considerably. Uriel and Iman, the Apocalypse twins, were the children of Archangel and Ichisumi, and they were raised by Kang the Conqueror, which explains a great deal. Using an axe capable of cutting celestial armor, they murdered their way across the cosmos, harvested life seeds and death seeds from the bodies, and then went grave robbing. Banshee, Dakin the Sentry, and the Grim Reaper came back as the four Horsemen of Death. What makes this the nastiest piece of casting in the entire history of the concept is that every choice was personal. Dakin had been drowned by his own father, Wolverine. Banshee held a grudge against the Summers family. The Grim Reaper had his neck snapped by Rogue. The Sentry had been killed by Thor. The twins then aimed each of them squarely at the hero, who put them in the ground. Sentry peeled his own face open to fire energy at Thor. The Grim Reaper killed Rogue outright. The Horsemen were only half the scheme, since the twins had also framed Earth for the murder of a Celestial so that Exitar the Executioner would arrive and erase the planet entirely. When it ended, Banshee was in Avengers' custody. The Sentry had vanished into deep space, and Dakin and the Reaper simply wandered off. 3. Wolverine, Deathbird, Caliban. A quarter of a century ago, Apocalypse needed a death for the most ambitious scheme of his career, gathering the 12 mutants named in Destiny's diary to amplify his own power. Logan was vulnerable, having lost his adamantium skeleton, and Apocalypse gave it back to him, which is precisely how the conditioning took hold. So he abducted Wolverine, slotted a Skrull imposter into his life so nobody would notice, and made him fight Sabretooth for the honor. Logan won. What most people forget is why he wanted to. He knew Sabretooth would have relished the role, and he believed he could resist the conditioning from the inside. He could not. Death murdered the fake Wolverine in front of the X-Men, then spent months hunting down the mutants on Apocalypse's list of the 12, and it took Colossus physically tearing the mask away to reveal who was underneath it. That reveal still lands today. The supporting roster is also stronger than it gets credit for. Deathbird as War, Ahab as Famine, and Caliban back in harness as Pestilence for his second tour, which makes the gentle Morlock Tracker the only person to hold two different Horseman titles. Apocalypse got everything he wanted from this team, which puts them above nearly every other lineup here. 2. Apocalypse's own children. Roughly 6 years ago, Jonathan Hickman and Teenie Howard dropped the reveal that reframes everything above it. Long before Plague, Kieros, or Warren Worthington, Apocalypse ruled the living island of Okara alongside his wife Genesis, and the two of them had 4 children. They named them after the tribulations their paradise had never suffered: war, famine, pestilence, and death. All 4 grew up Omega level. Their aunt, Iska the Unbeaten, forged a sword in 4 parts to celebrate their births. Their mother beat them whenever they showed weakness. As adults, they became the first Horsemen of Apocalypse and fought the Brood in ancient Egypt beside Imhotep and a Moon Knight. And when the Twilight Sword split Okara in half, they sealed themselves on the far side and held back a demon invasion for thousands of years. It did not end well for them. When Genesis merged with the demon god Annihilation and fell under its control, her own children were forced to march at the head of the armies they had spent millennia fighting. And that is who came back to invade Krakoa. Then comes the line that recontextualizes 4 decades of comics. Every Horseman recruited afterwards was an attempt to replace his own children. He was not assembling a strike force, he was grieving. 1. Archangel. Nearly 40 years ago, Louise and Walt Simonson took a founding X-Man, amputated his wings, faked his suicide, and handed him to the devil. Warren Worthington III had already lost everything in the mutant massacre. His wings destroyed by the Marauders and later amputated when Apocalypse plucked him out of an exploding plane, gave him techno-organic wings that fired poisoned metal feathers, turned his skin blue, and made him Death. He then beat the other 3 Horsemen for leadership, which is worth remembering whenever somebody calls him the soft one. What puts Archangel top of this list is not power, though. It is consequence. His transformation dragged the entire X-Men line into its grim and gritty era, and no other Horseman changed the books they appeared in. Iceman faking his own death is what broke the programming, and Warren only adopted the Archangel name once Inferno ended. Even that was not the finish. He later ascended as Apocalypse's heir, made Psylocke his own Horseman of Death, and forced her to kill him with a celestial life seed. Marvel is putting that golden skull back on him, right now in Inglorious X-Force, because they know exactly what they have. Some characters eventually escape being a Horseman. Warren Worthington has never once managed it, and Marvel keeps proving the point. If you want a deeper dive on more of your X-Men favorites, make sure you don't miss the 10 forgotten X-Men villains who could appear in Doomsday. Ranking these writers comes down to what you value most: raw power, lasting story impact, or the sheer cruelty of the recruitment. Archangel takes it on all three, though the argument that Apocalypse's children are simply the strongest mutants ever to carry those titles is difficult to dismiss. With Gambit wearing the mask again in X-Men 97, this list may need revisiting sooner than any of us expected. Hope you found this video helpful. See you in the next one.